Have you ever wanted to create horror music that keeps people on edge? Here are 6 steps you can incorporate into your next project to keep the audience holding their breath. These 6 quick tips will help you create terrifying music that audiences will never forget. From eerie drones to reverb strategies, these techniques will elevate your horror compositions. Horror thrives on the unexpected. Incorporating unconventional sounds like scraping metal, distorted whispers, or even creaking doors can add a unique texture to your compositions. So taking unconventional sounds, or even sounds that might be in the horror genre, and manipulating them is a cool way to get something interesting and unique. So here is basically a scrape on a violin. So it's a sample that I took and manipulated and then basically duplicated and reversed and put some effects on it. So I'll kind of go through what that looks like. So here's the original sample. So it's just basically a scrape on a violin. But what it ended up coming out like with the 2 tracks was this. Essentially what I did was I went into the sample, I took it down, and I think I chopped it about midway. And in Logic, I just went in and time stretched it out pretty far. So it created this long kind of sample that I could then go in and manipulate. And what I did was I just chopped it up pretty rough. I didn't even worry about fades or edits because I knew I was going to come back and put some kind of effects on it that was basically going to cover that up anyway. So it really didn't matter if I didn't notice any artifacts that I didn't like. But then what I did was I threw on a little bit of FabFilter Saturn, just this effect here. So kind of backing up, I've got a little bit of chorus and a little bit of Saturn on it. And without those plugins, this is what that one sample sounds like. This is it dry. It does have some natural reverb on the track. So if I didn't have all the effects on it, you can kind of notice the artifacts without any crossfades on it. But what I did is I sent it to the Valhalla reverb and actually to the Supermassive. So just makes it huge. And then when I add on the Saturn for some saturation and kind of different multi-band effect processing, kind of a bit crusher type of distortion, and then I added on the chorus. Kind of makes it a little bit more of a synth. And then just to kind of fill it out, what I did was I grabbed the same track, brought it down here, and I reversed it, and I threw basically a ton of it through the Valhalla Supermassive. So that track sounds like this. So that just kind of picks up right here in the middle where it loses a little kind of, it's not very interesting for a minute. It's just kind of that reverb tail. So altogether you get. Another pretty cool thing is just using, and there's a lot of, you can do it yourself if you've got some cymbals in your studio and you've got any kind of like violin bows or anything that you can bow, bowing any kind of like metal scrapes, things like that. They work really well with sampling for the horror genre. But to kind of give you an idea, just, some cymbal moans over something like that even. Take that same bit that I just recorded, but maybe add in some of my cymbal moans. Now for this, I'm just going to use a sample. This is actually from the Damage library. But let's just add what we created before with our cymbal moans and scrapes. So you get the idea. It basically kind of fills it out and completes it. So I've got a nice kind of ambient, ghostly texture there. Low-end frequencies are essential for creating dread. A sub-bass rumble can make your audience feel uneasy on a physical level, even if they don't consciously notice it. Layering a low-end drone with some subtle distortion can amplify the effect and build tension that never quite resolves. A lot of times what I've found is that when I'm watching something, a composer will use something like a pad or something like that, which is fine, but a lot of times, especially if you're trying to not add too much or really, not cover up dialogue or a scene that might not really require music, but you do want to add something, just low end is really all that you need. There's two that I've been using quite a bit. There is a Cinematic Pads by Spitfire Audio is really good. It has a pretty nice low end when you get kind of into the lower register, and it works really well for just kind of sitting under the mix and blending it in. The other I've been using a lot is this one it's the Horror Box plugin by Electronic Sound Lab. So, any of their kind of pads section works pretty well also when you kind of dip into the lower register. A lot of simple stuff. I'm really just kind of blending pads and textures and things like that. One thing that I found helpful too when you're doing that is to kind of go in and figure out who's going to live in what area. So I might actually go into something like a multiband filter, and I might set this one to maybe kind of go from, let's say, 60 hertz down. I might put a pretty heavy compressor on it, and then the other one I might actually go in and move it, and I might have the other pad kind of dip down in the area that it lives in so that they each have their own space and they're not completely fighting for the low end and just killing the sub when somebody's watching it in a theater. So, I might have the Horror Box, for example. It's a little bit more in the mid register, so I might drop out the extreme low end here, and then on the Cinematic Pads, because it does get so low, I'm probably going to dip out a little bit more of the mid range there because I want more of the top end and mid range of the Horror Box plugin. Even though I'm kind of down in the same register, I'm not getting that low end masking. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that performance of the Cinematic Pads and I'm going to layer the Horror Box 3 over it. Again, I'm pretty much staying down in the same octave, but I'm going to kind of be careful about how I mix it and maybe compress certain frequency ranges. In horror music, dissonance is your best friend. Clashing notes like minor seconds or tritones immediately create tension and unease. There's a lot of ways that you can create dissonance. I love kind of going back to when we're talking about the bowed instruments. A lot of them, if you can find patches that do have specific pitches without a lot of overtones, you can kind of focus in on certain tones. Playing around with what we just did when we kind of wrote some overlaying pads in the low end, let's try adding in a little bit of dissonance with just something simple like tremolo strings. We're essentially just kind of writing a mix between de-aeolian and diminished. Distortion adds aggression and chaos to the music. Take a clean sound like a string section or a synth and add distortion until it sounds unrecognizable. This technique works especially well for creating unsettling textures and high tension scenes. So with distortion, we could also add it in on something like our cymbals, scrapes, and moans. Only kind of got that going on, but we are going to add on just some regular kind of baked in Logic distortion. So let's see what we get when we add it into what we've already got. Drones are the backbone of suspense. A long, sustained note can fill the space with tension, keeping your audience on edge. Different octaves or textures can create complexity and depth. So let's take the part that we just wrote. We'll add a little bit of a drone ahead of it just to kind of build the suspense into that part, and then back off once we get into the piece that we've already written. So that worked out pretty well, building up into the part that we had, and then we were able to kind of bring it back in after the music was starting to drop out to add in just another layer into that part. I will say that one of the best kind of made for horror drones that I've tried out so far is actually the Electronic Sound Lab Horror Box 2, and then I just got the 3. If you get the 3, it's got everything that the 2 had in it, and they run, it's crazy cheap anyway, and they run deals all the time. But this is just basically out of the box horror, ready to go. That's what I love about this. I also really like that they have built-in distortion on it, distortion and delay. So if you want to kind of mix that in and mess up the sound even more, it gets pretty crazy. Same sound, just with some distortion and delay. Reverb is one of the most powerful tools in a horror composer's arsenal. Heavy reverb can make a sound feel distant, mysterious, or supernatural. So depending on what kind of mood we want to give the listener, we can add or subtract reverb. Now let's listen to this close mic version without any reverb. It basically creates an uncomfortable intimacy that puts people on edge. So another thing that you can do is you can take audio samples. If you have something like a impact right here, I've got another impact that basically I just brought in and I reversed it, but I've added quite a bit of reverb right here to it, and I really just want to get the tail of it and the reverberation that would normally happen after the hit comes in and it would trail off. I've reversed that effect so that it almost creates a swell into this hit. I've got quite a bit of reverb right here going to the Valhalla reverb, and with the hit of the reverb tail that I'm using, it normally sounds something like this. So that's this guy before it was reversed, and I've reversed it, and this is what it sounds like leading up to our normal impact. Another trick that I'll kind of do from time to time is that I will actually, instead of sending the reverb out of a bus like I've got right here going to a reverb on a bus channel, my reverb channel, I'll actually, if I just want to completely oversaturate it, if I want to make it sound like the instrument is way far off in the distance, I might actually just put the reverb on the channel, which is not something that you're typically supposed to do, but that's kind of what I like about the horror genre, is that you really don't have any rules as long as you're creating that atmosphere. So I might actually come in here and throw on the same type of verb, but mix it in here off the plugin itself right on the channel. So I've actually already got some reverb going to the bus, but I'm just going to overdo it. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share it with somebody who loves horror music. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.